Well, welcome everybody to GSA's April webinar. As always, it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. In some instances, it might be very early morning for you all, but I'm really glad everyone could make it today. So on the next slide, we're very pleased that we have 3 new members have joined GSA, Southern Launch. We had a long chat with Peter Williams last night on all their activities. ITTA with Dean Pagadis and Bobby Shields. They're doing some great stuff in the whole commercial space arena. And now JAMS has joined us with Ms. Masako Kikuchi. So we're pleased to have 3 new members. We're hoping by the next meeting we will have several others, but these are all on board as we now speak. As many of you are aware, we have a legislative working group as part of our activities. And there's a couple of things that have happened in that group that I think would be really important to make sure all you members had an opportunity to hear. So I've asked Pat Hines to just give a quick 2-minute update on some of their initiatives. So Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, James, and good morning to everybody. And I'm very happy to see Pam Underwood on the phone or on the call with us. So this legislative request I'm going to be sharing with you. James, is there a chance that you could put a copy of the legislative request that we submitted up on the screens for everybody to see?
That's above my pay grade, Pat, but maybe Steve can get it done as you're giving a quick update.
That would be good, Steve, so folks could see what I'm talking about. During conversation with Elizabeth Hill, who is in Senator Heinrich's office, she's a legislative assistant in Washington with Senator Heinrich. She asked me what I was working on, and I told her one of the things we've been working on for a long time is a package for legislative action on infrastructure development plans that we have evolved through this Global Spaceport Alliance for infrastructure funding, and this is a national plan. I stressed to Elizabeth that it is not just New Mexico, this is the National Spaceport Network Infrastructure Development Plan. And Elizabeth said, write it up, get it to us, we're working on appropriations. So I immediately contacted, I'm on the, as James mentioned, the legislative working group, the Space Policy Committee. I called George, got Steve and James involved. We discussed the language and map, and then we started socializing it on the Hill. Fast forward, we created the appropriations request. And then the, I'm going to read the language to you so you know what this is a 2023 appropriations request. And if Steve gets it up, you'll be able to see the entire appropriations request. But we sent this language included in the appropriations request. We are asking for $75,938,000 shall be appropriated to the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation for commercial space transportation activities. Of that amount, no less than $41 million should be allocated to the office, the FAA Office of Spaceports, for the purpose of administering and distributing spaceport infrastructure grants. The package that we sent forward included the appropriations request, the infrastructure development plan that you all are very familiar with, that you worked on and submitted input to, and it also contains the justification language for this request submitted by the spaceports in 2020. All of you have that have submitted your infrastructure development needs. That has also been submitted during this request process. And now what we're asking you to do, and we've reached out to the House Appropriations staff, and you have, there's a whole lot of things you have to do and while we keep moving this forward. But you, members who have spaceports in your states, in the United States. The next step would be for you to circulate the approved language. This is the language that we have so far among the GSA membership and among what we're asking you to do in the States. Please submit the entire appropriations request. Steve is showing you the request language, but there's a document that this is involved in. Please submit this to your congressional delegation, and if you need further information on which documents to submit, you have the Global Spaceport Alliance plan, and in that plan, infrastructure development plan, it includes the justification for the request in that the spaceports have asked for these funds for these purposes. That's the short story, but it really requires action on the part of all the states. In Oklahoma, Craig, you were great reaching out, and that's the kind of work that we can do with each other. If you have any questions about it and you want to talk to another spaceport director, many of you work with your legislative delegations. This is one more thing that we need. And that's it.
Well, Pat, thank you. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. We'll make sure that the membership get a copy of that document sent to them so they have it in front of them.
And if you want the full package, the infrastructure development plan and the legislative action, because Elizabeth Hill and Senator Heinrich's office is working this, your delegation might want to have the whole package that we've submitted so they know what they're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make sure that happens. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Very much appreciated.
Very welcome. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for everybody's help on this.
Well, we do have a slightly special session that we're about to embark on. It's not really a particularly big deal, in my opinion, but you know, we have what actually transpires as a new astronaut as part of our membership, as I'm sure some of you are only too well aware. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce the intrepid George Nield, astronaut. George, turning it over to you.
Thank you, James. So greetings, everyone. It's great to have a chance to talk with you today. As James alluded, 2 weeks ago, I had an incredible opportunity to fly on Blue Origin's 4th human spaceflight on their New Shepard rocket, and I'd like to share just a little bit about that today. I know many of you have had a chance to see launches and to hear astronaut presentations before. I'm hoping this will be a little bit different for a couple of reasons. First of all, in spite of the fact that I have been passionate about space and aviation since I was a child, and in spite of the fact that I have worked most of my career to enable human spaceflight activities, I am not a professional astronaut. The government did not select me. The taxpayers did not pay for the flight. I bought a ticket from one of the several US companies that is now offering suborbital and orbital space flights. And I think that's a key indicator of how far commercial space has evolved in recent years and what kind of a bright future we have in front of us. Secondly, I think I'm not going to share just about the space flight itself. You've heard a lot of that kind of thing before. I'd like to share a bunch of pictures about the entire experience so you can have a better understanding for why that week was so special, so exciting, so exhilarating, so memorable for me and for my family, in order to better prepare you for an opportunity to have a similar experience, hopefully at some point in the near future. So with that as an introduction, let's go ahead with the charts. Next chart, Steve. Here's a look at the other folks who flew to space with me. Marty Allen is a turnaround specialist from California. Sharon Hagel heads up a nonprofit that is focused on getting young folks, especially girls, interested in STEM and in space. Her husband, Mark, is a real estate developer. Gary Lai is a longtime employee of Blue Origin. He's been an engineer for them for the last 18 years and was really the architect for the entire New Shepard system. So it was great to have him on board. Finally, Jim Kitchen teaches entrepreneurship at the University of North Carolina. He's also a recognized world traveler, having been to every single UN recognized country in the world, 193 in total. So next chart. It's a great team. A couple of other key folks to be aware of. We had Sarah Knights on the left there, who was our so-called crew member 7. She didn't fly to space, but she led most of our training activities. And she also ensured we are all buckled in and was the last person we saw before we left the planet. And then met us after landing, opened the hatch, and greeted us upon our return to Earth. Then Kevin Sprague was our Capcom, or capsule communicator. He was the one who talked to us on the radio during the flight and kept us up to date on status of the countdown, the vehicles, the weather, and all those kinds of things. Next chart. So most of us flew into El Paso in Texas, and we stayed in a hotel overnight. The next morning, we looked out, and there was a whole bunch of these Rivian electric trucks that Blue Origin uses to take its staff around their site. And so we hopped in one of those and took off on a drive. Next chart. It was about 2 hours to Van Horn, and then another 20 minutes or so to so-called Astronaut Village. A lot of the terrain looked like this. There's not many people around, which is a great thing when you're talking about public safety for space activities, but very clear, very beautiful, just gorgeous terrain. When we got to Astronaut Village, here's one of the facilities there. This is the Kármán line, which is where we all gathered at the end of the day to think about what we'd been through and what was upcoming. Next chart is the Rock House. That's the dining hall where we were fed some excellent meals during our stay. Next chart. We actually stayed in one of these airstreams that they had located there. Each of the astronauts and their spouse or special guest stayed in those well-equipped facilities, and they were named after the original Mercury astronauts and or the Mercury 13. So next chart. I was in Gordo, named after Gordon Cooper. Next chart. We also had a very nice fire pit in the center of the complex there, and it's a great place to sit around and relax at the end of a day when you had some free time. Also, if you got up early, it was a great place to look out and see the sunrises, and boy, are they beautiful, and is in the next chart. Some gorgeous views in that part of the country. Next chart. So we had a couple of Zoom calls among the crew, but this was the first time to really see one another face to face. On that first day after we unpacked our bags in the Airstreams, got a chance to chat a little bit in front of the Kármán line there. And then after lunch, we had a number of other activities, including trying on our flight suits to see if there was any last minute tailoring required. We got fitted for some special hearing protection, had a pre-flight interview and some photos taken. And then we turned over our little blue bags here. These are our personal payload bags that we had been given, in which we were allowed to pack up to 3 pounds worth of mementos or souvenirs that would fly along with us during the mission. Next chart. So I had some banners from United States Air Force Academy in Stanford, where I went to school, some patches from my time at NASA and the Air Force, some flight test engineer wings, whistle I'd used as the drum major of our high school marching band. Next chart. Had some little astronaut Legos to give to the grandkids. Next chart. Don't know how many of you are familiar with the Curious George series, but this was one of my favorite stories that I read to my daughters as they were growing up, and now enjoy reading to the grandkids. This particular story, which was written back in 1957, was about Curious George the monkey and the man with the yellow hat and Curious George's trip into space. So really fun. Curious George sort of became a little mascot for our family and getting together before the flight. Next chart. Following day, had a chance to see the Astronaut Training Center. Next chart. There's a nice locker room there where we could change into and out of our flight suits. Next chart. There's a classroom with table and chairs, lots of neat pictures on the walls, and a mock-up of the capsule known as the reusable training ship Tortoise, where we spent a lot of our times. It was very realistic in terms of the 6 seats and the displays, and it actually had recorded the sounds from a previous space flight, and so would play those back as we were doing our training in the mock-up here, to the extent that we actually had to put on our earplugs because of the loud noises, the fans and the thumps and the engine noise in the capsule. So it made it very realistic. Next chart. Here we see Sarah in the 0G seat demonstrator showing how to hook up the harnesses and how we would need to get into and out of the seats, both in the one gravity environment on the ground and then when we were weightless during the flight. Next chart. We probably practiced getting in and out of the capsule a couple dozen times over the 3-day training period that we had. Next chart. So here's the crew inside the capsule mock-up. That cylinder in the middle, that is the top end of the solid rocket abort motor that is used to blast the capsule away from the booster in the event of a serious problem. And that could occur either sitting on the launch pad or at any time during a flight. Blue Origin had actually done tests of this abort system during a launch pad abort test, during a test that they did at max Q, and then right before the capsule separation at a very high altitude and speed to demonstrate its full capabilities. So that was sticking out in the middle of the capsule there. You also notice some cameras. There were 3 high quality cameras, such as the one over on the left-hand side, 3 other cameras coming out of the ceiling, and then 6 smaller cameras, 1 in front of every seat. So they got lots of pictures and videos that they're still working on to put together a keepsake video for us to remember the entire experience. Next chart. That afternoon, we got our flight suits. Very nice, comfortable, and we got to keep them. Next chart. Also had some more classroom work. Next chart. Sarah went through a little bit about the vehicle itself, the trajectory that we would fly, and the overall timeline. Next chart. For those of you who are not that familiar with the New Shepard, it's about 70 feet tall, including both the propulsion module and the crew capsule. It's powered by a BE-3 engine, which has 110,000 pounds worth of thrust, and the entire vehicle weighs about 73,000 pounds at liftoff. Next chart. On the wall there, they showed the display of the trajectory itself in comparison to what Alan Shepard flew on the flight where he became the first American in space. That was also a suborbital space flight back in 1961, and the same general trajectories are shown. Next chart. Some of the key events. The booster is actually taken out on a trailer in the horizontal orientation just after midnight on the night before launch, so about 8 hours before liftoff. They start the propellant loading about 3 hours before launch. The astronauts are driven out to the pad about 45 minutes before T0. And then they arm the escape system at 12 minutes before launch. Engine starts at T0, liftoff 7 seconds later. And then we were given a heads up that the main engine cutoff, or MECO, would occur about shortly after 2 minutes and 10 seconds. After MECO, a few seconds later, the capsule is separated from the booster, and at that point, we're able to unstrap and float around. Had about 3 minutes of weightlessness to enjoy, including a 1 minute warning when we needed to start thinking about getting back in our seats and strapping in. A little after 8 minutes, we were notified of the upcoming drogue parachute deployment, followed shortly after by the main parachute deployment, and then we're warned about touchdown coming just after 10 minutes into the flight. Next chart. We also spent a few minutes during our training doing some coloring. Blue Origin has a very nice nonprofit called Club for the Future that they have to encourage kids to learn about space and STEM subjects. Anybody can get a postcard from them and draw a nice picture or write a description of their ideas for the future of space travel, and then send it to Blue Origin, and they will fly it on a space flight, stamp it, flown in space, and mail it back to you. So they had each of us do our own little pictures that they'll keep for their collection. Next chart. We also had to come up with a name for the crew. So here we are in our flight suits in the capsule mock-up, and we came up with the name the Roaring 20s. Not only was this the 20th launch of New Shepard, but it also was an indication of the sound that we expected to happen as we left the Earth. So that was what we called ourselves. Next chart. Had a chance to drive over to the building called the Barn to see our rocket and the capsule sitting horizontally as they were undergoing its final checkout. Very impressive facility there. Next chart. We also were taken out to the launch pad itself. This was before the rocket was there, but we wanted to go through our procedures there and see what the pad looked like. Next chart. After climbing up the stairs, we would walk across the bridge to where the capsule would be. Next chart. And then line up, waiting to ingress into the capsule. Next chart. Of course, during this practice day, there was no capsule there, so we took advantage of our time to take a photo at the top of the tower there. And then came launch day. We had to wake up early. It was about a 4 a.m. wake up, grab a bite to eat and get dressed and showered and everything, and then had a chance to meet with our families. This is my family, my wife Kelly, our daughters Erin and Lisa, and our 5 grandkids. So plenty of time for some last minute hugs and well wishes. And then we had to hop into the cars, and they would drive us back over to the Astronaut Training Center. Our families had a little bit more time before they headed out to the viewing areas. We were able to pick one person from each astronaut to be very close to the launch pad and watch from the so-called fallback area. All the rest of the folks had to be a little bit farther away to make sure we didn't exceed the FAA's expected casualty figures in terms of how many people were in the hazard areas. So here we are arriving at the Astronaut Training Center. Next chart. So we hopped into our flight suits and had one last chance to review emergency procedures and what the timeline was going to be, and then one more time practice getting into and out of the capsule, both in terms of the 1G steps and what we would do when we were weightless. Next chart. We also had a visit from Bob Smith. He's the Blue Origin CEO, and he assured us of his personal involvement in the preparations for this launch and wished us Godspeed and a safe and successful flight. Next chart. 45 minutes before liftoff, we were driven out to the pad. This is what it looked like in the pre-dawn minutes. Next chart. Because the booster was already fueled, you can see there they're burning off the excess hydrogen from the tower there to keep things safe. Notice there's towers, one right next to the booster and then another on the other side of the walkway. That's where we actually climb the stairs to get up to the walkway. Next chart. Here you can see us as climbing up 7 flights of stairs. And next chart, the adrenaline was starting to flow now, so I don't think any of us even got winded climbing those stairs. Pretty exciting. Beautiful weather. Next chart. So here we are in this shelter at the top of the stairs there, or a safe room, you might refer to it as. Last minute chance to catch our breath. You can see there some tanks of oxygen or atmospheric air along the wall there. There's a radio there, some first aid kits. They assured us that this is where we should come to if there's an emergency on the pad after we've already had the pad evacuated. And supposedly this structure is strong enough to be able to withstand an explosion of the booster on the other end of the walkway there. And so we should stay there until it was safe to come on out. When we were given the go-ahead, it was time to leave, and then single file, we headed across the walkway. Next chart. Underneath the archway there that says, "Light this candle." Those are the words that Alan Shepard used as he approached his liftoff time. And then you'll see a little bell on the right-hand side of the walkway. A Blue Origin tradition is that as you pass the bell, you ring it a few times to indicate your presence and your readiness to go fly. Next chart. So one by one, we took that walk. Next chart. Across the walkway. Next chart. To the booster. Here's what it looks like with the entry panel up against the capsule there. Next chart. Sarah put on her headset and got the status of the countdown on the vehicle preparations. And then it was time to climb on in. Next chart. We went up to the capsule, turned around, time for one more photo, and then turned back around and climbed into the capsule. Next chart. Next chart. Okay, here's Gary Lai. He was in seat number 1. You can see how huge those windows are. 6 seats in the capsule. Every seat is a window seat, and they are gorgeous. Next chart. I was right behind Gary in seat number 2. Sarah came in after we were in and seated and strapped in. Next chart. And she went around to check our harnesses and to give us a last-minute pep talk. Next chart. She then went outside of the capsule, closed the hatch. They retreated. They withdrew the walkway there. And Sarah then made her way down all the stairs, hopped in a car, and drove to a safe distance, a mile or so away. And so at this point, we were the only ones in that area with a fully fueled rocket. Next chart. After Sarah was clear, they gave the signal to arm the escape system. So we had to make sure not to move our heads around, because at any point, if there had been an emergency, the abort motor could have blasted us free of the booster. At T-minus 10 minutes, they did the final go, no-go poll. And then at T0, the engine lights and bright orange flame. You can see it even on the windows, and the orange color was reflected in the white ceiling of the capsule. And after the engine got up to speed at T+7 seconds, next chart, it was time for liftoff. Next chart.
Whoa.
I've heard shuttle astronauts talk about feeling like they got kicked in the pants. This was not like that. It was a very smooth acceleration. We went up to about 3 Gs for the next 2 minutes. Max Q was about a minute later. And then we had main engine cutoff and capsule separation. At that point, we could unstrap and float around. The first procedure was to gather in order to have our picture taken as a crew. Next chart. Then Jim Kitchen, our world traveler, had brought his passports, so I pretended to stamp his passports to show he had left the planet. Next chart. Then it was time for some somersaults. Really pleasant sensation. And we spend most of the rest of the time looking out the windows. Next chart. Why? Because it was beautiful. This was the high point of the flight. The picture does not do it justice. Videos cannot do it justice. It's just hard to put into words. The curvature of the Earth, the thin blue arc across the top that is our atmosphere, and then the black, deeper than black sky. It just gives me goosebumps and chills to think about it, and I tear up. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's incredible. We got a 1-minute warning to start thinking about getting back into our seats. Next chart. And then the atmosphere started pushing against the capsule, which pushed us into our seats as the G's built up. Got up to about 5.5 Gs for just a few seconds. Meanwhile, the booster has made its way back to a perfect bullseye touchdown after restarting its engine. Next chart. Here's what it looks like just sitting on the landing pad, which is about 2 miles from the launch pad itself. Next chart. Meanwhile, the drogue parachutes are deployed to stabilize the capsule and then to pull out the 3 main parachutes. Next chart. And from there on, it was just a smooth, gentle ride down to the ground. Next chart. You can see not much out there. Next chart. They warned us we might feel a ground rush like you sometimes get or hear about from people taking a parachute jump. And so they said if you start feeling that way, like you're excelling towards the ground, just look to the horizon. I didn't have that problem, but next chart. It made a big dust cloud. Next chart. When we touched down, it looks like we hit hard. Actually, we did not. That is the Texas desert dust that's being kicked up. And right before touchdown, they fire some retro thrusters to slow down the capsule at the last second. So it was basically just a sort of a jostle, like sitting down on your chair hard. It was not uncomfortable at all. Next chart. Here's what it looks like just sitting there. That's me waving out the window to one of the drones that it was circling around with cameras, and you can see the lines for the parachutes still there. It took the ground crew about 10 minutes to drive out using their all-terrain vehicle capabilities, and then got to us very quickly. Next chart. Some of the stats for the flight. We got up to 2,200 miles per hour, flew to an altitude of more than 351,000 feet, so that's well in excess of 100 kilometers, and just over 10 minutes for the flight time. Just wow. Next chart. So Sarah got to the capsule, unlocked the hatch for us, and one by one we stepped out. That smile is real, boy. It was just such a feeling. Next order of business for me, next chart, after the obligatory wave, was to find my wife Kelly. Next chart. And next chart. I'm one of the few that I think has an appreciation for the fact that, as Congress has pointed out, space transportation is inherently risky. And knowing that we had made it safe and sound down to the ground, next chart, boy, did that hug feel good. So, what a day. Next chart. Had a chance to talk to Sarah and others and some of the members of the press there, and because everybody wants to know, how was it? It was awesome. It was amazing. It was incredible. It was beautiful. Got some more pictures with the crew and Sarah and Bob Smith, the CEO. Next chart. And they had a very nice ceremony. Audrey Powers, who I'd worked with as one of the Blue Origin's lawyers when I was at the FAA, is now one of the vice presidents of Blue Origin in charge of all of their New Shepard mission and flight operations. And she presented our astronaut pins right there at the capsule. Next chart. Here's what the pin looks like. Very nice A with the feather across the middle. Next chart. And then drove back to the Astronaut Training Center, where we got to meet all of the other guests and family members. And so here's my family with me. Next chart. After lunch, everybody got to hop in the vehicles and drive over to the landing pad and see the booster that had taken us to space. Next chart. Time for more pics. Next chart. And here's me and my family. Notice the Curious George t-shirts that everybody's wearing to support me. And other than some wind-blown hair, I was none the worse for wear. Next chart. Just after we got to see the booster, it didn't take Blue Origin long to take the booster down to the horizontal position and tow it back to the barn to start getting it ready for its next flight. So they moved quick. Next chart. I'm really pleased with something else Blue Origin did. They gave us a chance to meet with the engineers from mission control, the technicians, the mechanics, the support people, just informally, to have them ask questions and have their pictures taken with us and give us a chance to thank them for all they did to enable us to have a safe and successful mission. Next chart. And let me tell you, that's a special moment for us to meet these people, and a special moment for them to have their picture taken with these new Blue Origin astronauts. Next chart. So the rest of the day, time to reminisce and celebrate, and had a great meal together and tell stories and see all the stars in that beautiful West Texas sky. And then the next morning, hop in the cars and head on home. Wow, it was a week that I will never forget. A truly incredible experience. And if you're ever offered a chance to do something similar, you need to take it. It was awesome. So I know that took a while to go through those charts, but I wanted to give you a feel for my experience and better prepare you for yours if you get a chance to do that someday. And happy to take any questions.
Oh, George, can you hear me? It's James.
Yes.
So where are you going next?
So, I mean, this was sort of a culmination of my life and career, and wow, I am happy. I don't need to do anything else. But if someone were to offer me another flight, I'd certainly do it again.
Yeah, I bet.
So there was a question about photos. Of course, electromagnetic interference is a big deal. We were not allowed to have phones or Fitbits or electronic gear of any kind in the capsule or near the rocket. So Blue Origin took lots and lots of pictures. There were thousands of pictures. I'm still sorting through them all, and they promised us that integrated and carefully edited video in a couple of weeks. Of course, our family and spectators also were able to use their cameras from their perspectives. And so again, lots of pictures to remember the day and to share with people.
George, it's Jim Miles. Was there a waiting list, lead time?
So people are starting to recognize that you don't have to fly with NASA anymore. And so now there are 3 companies selling tickets, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic. Virgin Galactic apparently has more than 600 people on their waiting list. Blue Origin started off by having an auction for the first seat that they were going to sell, and that was for the flight in July that Jeff Bezos flew on. And of course, when I heard that, I raised my hand and volunteered and put in a bid, and it rapidly got way out of reach for people who were not extremely wealthy. But fortunately, Blue Origin got back to me afterwards, and were able to find a flight. And I understand they're sold out, at least for the next year. But if this is something that's of interest to you, I encourage you to contact them. There's a question about the overview effect. Of course, I mean, this was such a short flight, just 10 minutes. But you know, I have to say that this did change me. When you see a good movie or a play, or you hear some stirring music, or you read a classic book, wow, that was awesome. This is all that put together and more. The things we saw, the things we heard, the things we felt, and the entire experience, which we're able to do with the other members of the crew and with our families. It's just wow. And certainly it makes you appreciate how small we are in the vastness of the universe, how beautiful and fragile the Earth is, and how we need to do our best to take care of it. All those things are certainly very real.
Yeah.
There's a question about medical review. Again, when we set up this commercial human spaceflight regulatory framework at the FAA, we consciously decided this is not to select the perfect physical specimens to go fly to Mars like NASA's doing. So there are no medical requirements. Each company gets to decide what they want to do. Certainly encouraged to talk to your doctor. Had to be able to climb up those 7 flights of stairs and be able to get in and out of your seat and so forth, but no specific medical requirements were required by Blue Origin.
George, I guess we'll need to kind of move on to the next phase of the session now. Is there one more question that anyone has for George at this point?
So I see lots of questions in the chat box. I probably don't have time to go through those today, but feel free to reach out to me later, and happy to share the story. It's quite a tale, and I love sharing my experiences. So
George,
again,
that was absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. I wish I could give you a round of applause from everybody. That was unbelievable. Our intrepid chairman.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve Wolf, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce Jeff Faust and the next panel. You still there?
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. Yes, our next panel is going to be moderated by Jeff Faust, which many of you know, who is a reporter for Space News, but is also writes very prolifically about the emerging commercial space sector and about space in general and commercial space in general. And so what I will do is I will now turn this over to Jeff to introduce the panel, and then introduce the topic as well, and get into the second part of our conversation today. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. We are sort of violating one of the cardinal rules of public speaking, that is following an astronaut. But I think you've gotten a taste of why this field is so interesting and so inspirational. so you know the benefits of dealing with some of the challenges spaceports face. And that's the topic of this panel discussion, is to look at some of the issues, some of the challenges that spaceports face and how they are overcoming them. We have a panel of 3 experts who can talk in detail about both specific spaceport projects, but also provide a broader perspective. We have Steve Howard. He is the county administrator of Camden County in Georgia. He leads up the Spaceport Camden effort, which I think many of you are familiar with. We have John Paffett, who is the commercial director of Spaceport Cornwall in England. They are getting ready for their inaugural launch with Virgin Orbit as soon as this summer. And finally, we have Pam Underwood, who is the director of the Office of Spaceports at the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, who can provide the perspective from the broader spaceport point of view. In the interest of time, since we had that great discussion from George, I'm going to jump right in and start off with Steve Howard, if he can provide sort of a quick update where things stand with Spaceport Camden. It's a very fast-moving development going on there, lots of things going on. Just provide an update where things stand and sort of what the next steps are.
Thank you, and congratulations to Dr. Nield. That was amazing, impressive. Spaceport Camden reached a major milestone of December 20th of last year. We became the 13th licensed spaceport in the United States and one of 3 on the East Coast. So very excited to those announcements were made. We're currently working with the hopeful of a public-private partnership. We're working with a variety of companies to kind of realize the vision of Spaceport Camden, which is a true public-private partnership. And we made a big announcement last week about that. We're hopeful to bring 1 or more companies forward, we hope in the next few weeks, but we're excited about what lies ahead for Spaceport Camden and bringing it online, and the opportunity for synergy with other spaceports and this great organization here as well. So we're looking forward to the next chapter with Spaceport Camden. We hope that to be launching small lift rockets in the future soon.
All right, thanks, Steve. John, maybe just an update where things stand with Spaceport Cornwall as you get ready for your first launch.
Yeah, morning everybody, and thanks, Jeff. We're full steam ahead, preparing for a launch which should be occurring this summer. So working with Virgin Orbit on bringing Launcher 1 across to the UK. As I think most of you are aware, we're taking what is an existing licensed operational airport, so Cornwall Airport, Newquay, and converting that into a spaceport. We completed a lot of the critical infrastructure work last year, which was actually just some modifications to the taxiway and one-ways to an orbital to enable powered manoeuvres. And now we're just putting in place a launch integration building and clean room, which will be coming online in a couple of months. So that's excellent. So our license applications are in for both the launch operator license, the range license, and the spaceport license. Worked the boards having those approved in the end of June. So we'll be the first licensed spaceport out of the UK. And then that will open up the ability to then launch later this summer. So I'm hoping we'll see a launch in the July to August time frame, which is really exciting.
All right, thanks, John. Pam, you want to give us sort of an overview of the Office of Spaceports and sort of what you're seeing from the prospective spaceports out there in terms of, some of the challenges you're hearing from them as they try to stand up their spaceports.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And I second Steve Howard. Excellent briefing, George. It was really inspiring to see and get to experience what you walked through. Really exciting. And, I use that to segue into spaceports are kind of where it all starts, whether it's a private site like the Blue Origin site that we just saw on George's charts, or FAA licensed sites like what Steve Howard, or even our international sites where with Spaceport Cornwall. There's really a lot of exciting things going on in commercial space. And so that's really what I'm seeing, Jeff, is that the growing number of activities at a diverse location of spaceports. Years ago, it was all launching, at least in the United States, from one of our federal range locations like Vandenberg or Cape Canaveral, but we're really seeing a diversification of those locations. more capabilities by our FAA licensed spaceports and a growing number of activities from those. I think that's really exciting. I think that another natural tendency is as those diversified locations take place into more commercial or FAA licensed spaceports, we're also seeing a great deal of needs for infrastructure, which is similar to what Pat Hines was just talking about. And the proposals that have been brought forward by industry groups such as GSA, I know CSF has also done the same thing, indicating that funding for infrastructure grants would be very useful. You know, my office, in Office of Spaceports, we don't really advocate for funding well within the federal government. Industry's always done it better than we can. But my job is to make sure that we're ready, so that if we're able to get appropriations consistent with what the industry has, you know, framed out as the needs, that my office would be ready to adjudicate and manage that program for the best part of the industry. So we've been doing a great deal of work to try to get documentation together, legal assessments, things like that, so that if appropriations do become a reality for spaceport grants, that we'd be able to move right into it, and to make sure it's to the maximum benefit of our industry, of our spaceports. You know, I think there's a great opportunity, and one of the things I think that GSA does a really good job is it's a broad network of domestic and international spaceports, because I think that's probably my next point. Another exciting piece that I'm seeing is the collaboration between spaceports, and I think that's really important. What we should be doing as an industry is establishing a threshold standard, if you will, for global interoperability. Our industry is going global. We're seeing it now. You know, the launches from Spaceport Cornwall that was just discussed, there's a number of others that my office is working with, companies looking to launch abroad, foreign companies interested in launching in the United States. What we have an opportunity here is to provide and establish some standard set of global interoperability for these activities. And I personally think that spaceports could be the foundation for that, because the spaceports really is where the activities are starting. And I think that we have an opportunity through groups like this to really engage and expand on those partnerships. So thanks, Jeff, for the opportunity to comment. I look forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks. I want to encourage all of you in the audience, if you have questions, feel free to write them into the chat or simply say that you have a question, and we will invite you to ask your question orally if you like, or I'll simply read out the question that you type in, depending on what goes on, what works best. But feel free to do that at any point here in the discussion. We'll try and bring those questions in as quickly as we can. Steve, I turn to you. Obviously, Spaceport Camden's been in the news quite a bit because of some of the legal challenges and the referendum and so on. And how are you dealing with those challenges that you're facing? And you mentioned this new public-private partnership, bringing in private investors as a new approach, and sort of what prompted that approach, and what are the benefits of that new partnership you're talking about?
Yes, I'd say, for Camden, Spaceport is not a sprint, it is a marathon. So I can tell you that. Also, they say Rome wasn't built in a day, but I will tell you it's tough work to get to the finish line. So it's not a typical project like in local government. And us being in local government, we're in the spotlight, which makes it a little bit more challenging. But the initiative for a public-private partnership really isn't something new that we came up with currently. It's something that was always part of our vision mission statement early on. But we're just at a point now, I think, with accomplishing the launch site license to be able to have better discussions with companies. So I think that's really good news. Just like the private sector is driving all this innovation, so we think that's fantastic for us and aligns nicely with Spaceport Camden. But it is challenging, being in local government. The ballot issue, I think, what you talked about. That initiative actually was a 3-year process where folks got signatures. We didn't write the ballot question. Yes meant no, no meant yes. A lot of confusion, a lot of outside money that was kind of poured into that campaign. So as a requirement of that, so we're now challenging that with the Georgia Supreme Court as well. So we feel very confident that we'll win on those merits, just because of Georgia's powers for local governments, Tier 1 and Tier 2 powers. But those are just distractions. But we continue to be persistent, focused, and we think that we're going in the right direction with the private sector, coming online with us. So we're excited about that, but we got to continue to be focused. Our board of commissioners, even the past commissioners, remain focused. This is a strategic priority for we think Camden, the region, the state of Georgia, but we think also for the United States, just like Pam just mentioned. We think for site redundancy, all these different things are important to be able to leverage this currently stranded assets. So we're excited about what the future holds, and we remain positive and very optimistic that our future remains very bright.
John, I wanted to turn to you. You're sort of a trailblazer here with the UK spaceport strategy and licensing and so on. What sort of challenges have you faced being sort of front of the line in terms of getting a spaceport license and dealing with a new regulatory scheme?
Yeah, so I'll definitely agree with Steve. It's definitely a marathon, or even an ultra marathon, I'd say. So our challenges really sort of gone back even from the beginning when the Space Agency did an assessment of potential locations for spaceports in the UK. So that's back in 2014, and sent us a letter to say, sort of, congratulations, you've been down selected. But at that point, it didn't come with any form of funding or support. It was basically, we think you've got a location to be well suited for spaceport. Can you now get together with industry and come forward with proposals? So it's been a long time in the making. We were obviously successful in 2019 in securing funding or securing a partner with Virgin Orbit and putting in for funding and support from the UK Space Agency. That itself was an interesting challenge because at that point in time was when Cornwall Council or the County of Cornwall had declared a climate emergency. So we were trying to raise money for the spaceport at the same time as a climate emergency had been declared. So there was a lot of attention over the impact of spaceport activities within Cornwall and how we would mitigate against those issues. And so we're pushing very much forwards to be a sustainable spaceport moving forwards. But as you also say, we're being the first of the spaceports in the UK. We're also the first one to go through the new UK regulatory process. So that only came into being last year. So there's a lot of work that's been done on the UK by the UK government to put a framework in place. But we're very much the guinea pigs, as it were, as we go through that process, and that's really an interesting challenge because that's about educating the stakeholders, making them aware of what we're trying to do and the activity that we're trying to undertake at the airport. And really bridging between the different stakeholders and organizations. There's a lot of similarities with what happens in the US, but also some differences. So trying to bridge the differences between what, for example, Virgin Orbit's doing in the US versus what it's going to be doing in the UK, and the safety assessments and the assessments of environmental effects. So there's a lot of work going on there. We're working very closely with the government, but say being that first group through the gate certainly is taking a lot of effort to educate and to really iron out the regulatory process moving forwards. So quite a lot of challenges really, but everybody's supportive. There's a big desire to see this happen this year out of the UK. So everybody's trying to move towards that common goal of achieving launch this year.
All right. Pam, we're already starting to see some questions coming in from the chat. One from Dale Ketchum. How can you best characterize where things are on the interagency working group on the future national spaceport strategy?
Yeah, great, and thanks for the question, Dale. So as it's true, to back up real quickly before I answer Dale's question, my office has started to form a national spaceport interagency working group, the goal of which would be to bring our government partners, stakeholders really, those that use the range or maybe manage some of the federal ranges, together to talk about a number of issues. Agencies involved include the Department of Defense, including, of course, the U.S. Space Force, NASA, multiple levels of NASA, not only at the headquarters level, but as well as at Kennedy Space Center and Wallops, who are operating ranges. We've got Department of Commerce representation, Department of State. So I feel like we have a great group of people. And of course, the FAA is included. My office is the chair for that activity. We haven't officially kicked it off. We've been having a few planning meetings, trying to establish, a common work plan and potentially even a charter for the group. We look to hopefully kick that off sometime early this summer. Our goal is to make sure that we have industry participation. Exactly what form that will take, we're still trying to figure that out. I think many of you can appreciate anytime industry input is sought from the federal government, there are certain established ways that you're supposed to do that so that you can't officially use that input. FACAs are one idea. We're trying to pin that down to exactly what that would look like, but it's the goal of not only myself as the chair, but everyone participating in the group from all the agencies. We need that industry participation, whether it's a FAA licensed spaceport or a user of our spaceports. I think that's going to be really important. We have some ideas for things that we want to focus on. My goal is to try to, a couple things. First, it appears that the relationship between some of the federal ranges and the FAA licensed spaceports is a bit adversarial, and perhaps it could be more partnered approach. There's also a great deal of discussion. Some people think federal ranges compete with the private sector. I think we should look at that as an element. Funding for infrastructure development. We can't, of course, get into how the federal ranges fund their infrastructure development, but if we can talk about standards or maybe basic infrastructure components that might be, the idea of consistency between spaceports. Even though I recognize I want to say that very loosely because I know each spaceport is very unique and can host a different type of activity, so it might drive at different infrastructures. But there's got to be a kind of a common set, or maybe even services that be recommended from spaceports. So it's the nature of the discussions I want to have amongst the interagency. But I think then also getting industry input in those topics, as well as others. There might be others that industry feels that we need to include is important. So I don't have a lot of details on what the industry involvement will look like yet, but that's definitely a goal. And I hope to be able to update you guys more. But Dale, I hope that gives you a sight picture about where we're at with that National Spaceport Interagency Working Group.
Yeah. And a quick follow-up question to that from Steve Wolf. Do you see a role for an organization like GSA in that working group? No, we lost Pam there or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if she wants to answer that question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
That's all right. I just want to make sure you could hear me. I apologize. I think my internet skipped for a minute, but I did hear at least most of the question. So Steve, to answer your question, absolutely. When I say industry involvement, what form that takes, whether it's a GSA on behalf of industry or industry through GSA, yes, absolutely. We just haven't figured out the mechanism to enable it yet. Like I said, we'd rather not stand up a brand new FACA because that takes too much time. Anyone that knows me knows I'm not a very patient person. I want to get this going and so we can get some work done. But yes, whether it's GSA or the companies individually, I definitely think there's a role.
All right. I know one of the challenges that many spaceports face is attracting customers, attracting launch vehicle providers, or perhaps other companies that may be users of spaceport facilities. So, Steve, I wanted to ask you, especially after you got the FAA licenses in December, what level of interest you're seeing in Spaceport Camden? How far along are discussions with any potential users of the spaceport, given obviously you still have to get the spaceport developed, but the fact that you now have an FAA license, does that change your efforts in terms of attracting customers?
I think it does, and we've had some high-level discussions with 2 or more launch companies, and we were fortunate in the past to have interest, although we're a small lift now, from tier 1 companies as well in the past that had some interest in Camden. But we are having a high level of interest now that we have the launch site license. and which is a good thing for us. And I think, again, I think there's a lot of opportunity for synergy with other spaceports, and I'm looking forward to that as well, of learning from others, but also finding ways that we can work together and kind of create this whole corridor all the way up the East Coast together collectively. But we are having a high level of interest, and I think the license clearly, helps and demonstrated that effort. And we're looking forward to hopefully in the near future making some announcements soon. But we're looking forward to continuing our discussions and being able at some point to bring those forward as we reach new milestones with the establishment of public-private partnerships and the acquiring of the property and things like that, which we're ongoing as we speak today.
John, obviously you have Virgin Orbit as your first customer at Spaceport Cornwall, but what interest are you seeing from other potential horizontal launch providers who might want to operate from the spaceport?
Yeah, so as you say, we've got Virgin as the initial launch service provider. We're restricted to horizontal launch systems, but we are in discussion with a couple of parties, one of which we recently signed an MOU that was announced with Sierra Space for things like the return missions, for example, so bringing stuff back to the UK. So there's a number of discussions we're having with future parties which are related to directly supporting the launch operations. And then it's the sort of extended ecosystem as well. So a number of people looking at using our facilities for engine testing, and a number of companies are looking to establish themselves at the spaceport, even though they're not directly launch service providers. So there's a lot of growing interest, and it's been really quite refreshing to see just the number of companies that are looking to try to set up capabilities at the spaceport this early in our existence.
One thing I've seen a number of spaceports try to do is try to be sort of hubs for space activity, space companies, including companies that don't necessarily use the spaceport for launches themselves, but create sort of an economic hub of activity. So for both Steve and John, I'm curious what success you are seeing in sort of building up industry hubs at your spaceports in terms of attracting companies that will not only just launch there, but also perhaps support those companies or do other activities there.
So I'll take that. Yeah, so we're definitely seeing that occur. In fact, we've taken the opportunity to bring forward some of our plans. We're now constructing the Centre of Space Technologies. So that's a multi-user facility with both laboratory workspace and offices, where we can support a range of customers that wish to establish capabilities at the spaceport or use facilities on an ad hoc basis, and then really growing the technology park. So we're certainly seeing a lot of interest. And as I say earlier, really pleased by the level of interest. We thought it would occur. We thought it would actually probably occur after launch and as we move into second and third launch. But we're already seeing now people wanting to establish a presence at the spaceport and really grow that ecosystem and the sort of cluster type activities.
Yeah. Steve, anything you wanted to add in terms of what's going on at Spaceport Camden?
Well, we are, we obviously we're not at build out yet, so we're not that far along, but we are starting to see the variety of the companies that have high level interest that are connected in that ecosystem, as well as STEM related university systems. So that is kind of, I think, coming along nicely. We just got to realize that vision now, which is exciting with the public-private partnership, which one group that has come forward is looking at creating a fund that would actually use non-taxpayer money to kind of accelerate this build out, which would be really advantageous for us then to be able to attract these other companies that would actually come to Camden in a variety of areas that would complement the current high-tech workforce that we have currently, because at Kings Bay we're very fortunate to have them here in Camden County. So, but just I would just mention we're hopeful that same effect's going to happen here, that cluster, that technology hub that complements that ecosystem as a result of having the spaceport as a catalyst magnet.
Pam, a question for you from Pat Hines, and please keep sending those questions in. We'll get to them as we go along. The question from Pat is, one significant barrier at the regulatory level is the fact that space transportation is not recognized as a transportation industry in much the same way as ground, sea, rail, and air. Space is not. How big of a barrier is that in terms of regulatory issues and when you're dealing perhaps with other agencies in the federal government?
And that's a great question. Thanks, Pat. I appreciate it. Right now, I have mixed feelings on that. And this is actually one of the topics that we've started to discuss in that National Spaceport Interagency Working Group that I just answered for Dale a moment ago. Designating space as either critical infrastructure, nations of critical infrastructure, some kind of designation like that. Mode of transportation has also been discussed, at least amongst the members of the Interagency Working Group. I do suspect that the group might come forward with a recommendation on those subjects. I personally have mixed feelings on it because when you get into those types of designation, there are some, like everything, good and bad points associated with it. So for right now, I don't really know that I've seen it to be a huge barrier. Because when it comes to something like infrastructure grant funding, yes, of course, maybe having one of those designators, mode or critical infrastructure designation, might open up an additional funding source. There's also just a general perspective that I think we need to change more immediately, which is spaceports are important. There's a lot of excitement about commercial launch. I talked about this before with Scott McLaughlin and all the great things that happened at Spaceport America with maybe the VG launch. And unfortunately, in all that press activity, you didn't see a single mention of Spaceport America or their contribution to it. So I feel that, first and foremost, what I'd like to do is change that conversation, make spaceports and the critical role, not critical infrastructure, the critical role they play in space launch is more common and more talked about. Because I feel that once that happens, you might get more of a focus on needs, and then of course potentially funding for those needs. If along the way we do cross the bridge where, hey, look, we need to designate this as a mode or something, then of course we'll look at that. But I think right now I'm on the fence a little bit, me personally. Please know that's Pam Underwood's opinion. I can't really speak as an agency position on this matter. But as far as I know, I haven't really seen that as a barrier per se yet. I think it's more about just recognizing the importance of spaceports is a good starting point, at least for now.
Yeah, and Pat just asked a follow-up. What are the negatives that we need to be aware of in being recognized as a national transportation mode?
So, I think that it's, the regulation that might come with that, or, security provisions. I think many of you guys are known that there is at least I think I mentioned this, at least in the January SpaceCom, we are looking at we've teamed with some security agencies, FBI, Secret Service, DHS, and we're starting to do some security assessments of our nation's spaceports. The good news is our security folks are trying to get an assessment, at least from a national level, what are the nation's vulnerabilities as a result of activities or items at our nation's spaceports. That's not a bad thing. Because the effort that we're doing is voluntary. We're working with the spaceport directors. Everyone's a willing participant, which is great at this point. We're not looking to leverage any requirements in that area. But if you start to get into some of these designations, that's where some might go in an area that maybe we're not ready for yet. So that's one of my concerns. And to be real honest, Pat, I don't know all the negatives, but I have some concerns that there might be some additional oversight or regulation that perhaps maybe we're not quite ready for yet. So one of the things that we're doing in or we plan to do in this National Spaceport Interagency Working Group is setting up a series of kind of education sessions so that our members, the interagency, can get smarter on this topic. I think each one of us know a little bit about But if we want to be able to be in a position of making a recommendation, we need to have a broader education to know what all of the negatives and positives might be from any one of these designations.
All right. I want to ask Steve and John their perspectives. Is the fact that space transportation is treated differently from other modes of transportation been a disadvantage to you in your spaceport development plans? Does it, for example, cut off access to certain types of grants? Does it, create regulatory issues? Anything that being different about space has been a challenge for you in your spaceport development work?
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think from the UK's perspective, the regulators' experience is coming very much from the aviation side of things. So the legislative and regulatory authority now sits under the Civil Aviation Authority. So actually, in fact, we had a visit here this week with the Department of Transport. And so their experience is very much coming at it from the aircraft side, and what we're having to do is really explain the differences between what's happening on the aircraft side today and versus what we're trying to do from a launch system perspective. Now, fortunately for ourselves, the launch systems are the carrier vehicle is an aircraft, so a lot of the operations we're doing are standard aircraft operations. With the addition of some hazardous operations when we're loading fuels onto the launch vehicle, for example. So we're not really seeing a barrier per se, but on the UK side, more of an education needs to be done. One of the things we are keen to look at in the future, though, is how the market will evolve beyond just the orbital work into things like point-to-point, for example. So looking at systems like Galactic and Sierra Space to see how that may open up some future markets as well.
All right. Steve, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think, for Georgia, although Georgia, our number one export is actually aerospace parts. Of course, we have Georgia Tech, UGA, and others that are doing satellites and doing a variety of great things in space-related activities. This is new for Georgia. So this is kind of an educational process that we're having to really start the conversation and beginning to educate legislators, although supportive, that the importance of this being looked at as a mode of transportation as well, which in turn I think would help and assist with some funding opportunities in the future. They have been very supportive with legislation in the past, and we're looking forward to the next cycle with the legislators as we go forward now that we're licensed, and hopefully we'll have more milestones in the next session. And the goal I think would be to mirror. I think Florida does an amazing job where they've been able to make that as a mode of transportation within the Department of Transportation, which I think is a great model that I'd like to duplicate in Georgia as well.
Great. I'm going to combine two questions here, one from Steve Wolf and one from Laura Forsick. This is for both Steve and John. Given your experiences in establishing spaceports, what advice would you give to a municipality or region just beginning to plan for a new commercial spaceport? And are there any areas of spaceport development that need to change or evolve to make this a smoother process from start to finish?
I'll go first if it's okay. Well, I'll tell you, from a local government standpoint, it is challenging because you are in the local arena. And these kind of projects, as in the Camden case, is very highly charged. And the longer it takes, you have missed opportunities, but it gets more and more challenging. Commissioners change. We're very fortunate. This group of commissioners haven't been the original ones. And I often joke a little bit, but there's only a few people left. One of them's me and still the FAA folks. So we've hung in there together, where a lot of them have actually changed out. That happens. And also, it gets challenging with the funding. Because the longer a project takes, the more it costs. And this isn't a typical project like a road I can build or a park I can create. People can see that quickly. This is a license, which still requires build out companies to come and those kind of things. So it can be challenging, to continue to pay for this. And a lot of these things you don't have control over. There's not a lot of motivation, sense of urgency. Nothing against the federal side and others, and even the state side. There's a lot of variety of stakeholder involvement, cooperative agencies, consulting agencies. Every one of these groups, it takes time to accomplish all these pillars, including the environmental impact statement, which averages a long time to accomplish that goal alongside everything else. So it's costly. You've got to be in it for the long run. You can't be weak. You can't give up. You're going to have obstacles, but you got to be persistent and focused if you want to accomplish that. But also, I think, do your due diligence to ensure, does it make sense for that investment for where you're at. I think every spaceport is going to have some key assets. They're going to have some interesting, unique capabilities. So you need to do that due diligence to make sure, does the model make sense? And I think in the Camden case, we're fortunate. What has changed, I think, is what you're seeing now. I mean, it's amazing what's happened the last few years with the commercial side. Just seeing even what George Nield talked about today with going to space and things. So it's exciting times, and I think that this is going to become more normal as time goes on with spaceports. And I think if we come together, much like I think Pam's doing some great work there in her office, that's going to be important, for lessons learned, and that's what we want to do at Spaceport Camden, is learn from others. But I'd say it is definitely, you got to be in it for the long haul. You've got to have commitment. It's going to take multiple years to accomplish that goal, and you just got to be in it to win it, and make sure that you continue to tell your story, get that buy-in, because it is going to be a challenging ride, and buckle up.
All right, John, any advice, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Steve on all of that. I mean, you've got to really think about the spaceport business in the whole, not just from a spaceport perspective, but also in terms of the operators that you're serving, the customer base, the market, the regulatory environment, but really just thinking about the business and the sustainability of that business. That's quite key. And then to Steve's point, really, then the environment in which you're trying to implement your spaceport, and when I mean environment, the local environment, the principality, the council in the case of the UK, and that environment can change with time. When we started in Cornwall, and we received that, say, notification from the space agency, we've been down selected, the council at that point was very much, go bring us Virgin Galactic, space tourism. And then actually within the council, the mood music changed, and it was less about space tourism, and really much a focus on the satellite launch activities. So with these sort of 3-4 year change of political environment, that can have quite a big impact on the activity. So it is being very clear about what your business and your business model is. As Steve said, it's then persevering with that, but say also being very pragmatic about the sort of sustainability. As I mentioned earlier, that what I like about the Cornwall model is we're building on an existing operational airport, so it's really just another service we're supporting. To some extent, we're not dependent upon having a large number of launches per year in order to keep the spaceport going. So it's really focusing on those areas and going, okay, have we uncovered all of the issues and all of the challenges that we need to overcome, and then just systematically knocking them down.
All right. Pam, you see a wide variety of spaceports and prospective spaceports coming into your office. Do you see any sort of themes in terms of areas areas of advice that you might give, or areas that need to be streamlined or improved for these spaceports to improve their odds of success and the time it takes to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And I'm really happy to hear John and Steve's comments. I think John framed it up really well along with Steve. When you want to create a spaceport, you need to be very mindful of a number of things. Market need is definitely one of them, as well as your local surroundings and so on and so forth. And that's honestly advice number one I generally give to any prospective spaceport. What kind of industry do you want to serve? What kind of capabilities do you want to be able to provide? Does the market needs those? How many people in the market need it? Is it one company? Is it 10? Those are all ideas and things that you need to keep as you're planning for your site operations, as you're planning for the infrastructure. Because I think having a good plan and a good market, and hopefully even known users in mind, might streamline, to use your words, Jeff, a little bit, the process you need to go to for regulation. Steve Howard, because he's our most recently licensed spaceport. Congratulations again, Steve, and your team in Georgia. I think, I love how you said, you better be ready to stick with it, be in it to win it, because boy, you definitely were. And there's a number of things that can happen, but having a good plan is your key to seeing it through to the end. Having a good plan, having a good understanding of your market assessments, the companies you want to serve. The reason is when you start to engage some of the local community, like John mentioned, or stakeholders, sometimes as we call them in the FAA, those that are around you, if you have better plans, you're able to better communicate the operations, and they, as the stakeholders, can then impact or assess the impacts that they may see. In the absence, my favorite thing to say is the absence of data, people tend to make stuff up. And sometimes that'll align with their greatest fears. So having a good plan and a good assessment of the market and the users that would come to you will help provide the data that will hopefully keep some people from making stuff up that would may not ever be part of your plans at your proposed spaceport. That alone can really streamline the process. Having a known user versus a conceptual or a concept-based vehicle would also help, because it again goes back to a more defined plan, something that the stakeholders around you might be able to understand. And I mean stakeholders very broadly. That could also be my colleagues in the air traffic organization that would need to understand, airspace implications or mitigations that might be necessary. So really having that well-defined plan before you start down the process will kind of help you and streamline to the best of the ability. Jeff, I think one more point I'd like to make for this group, and I'm pretty sure it's well known, the FAA does have intentions at some point to revisit the Part 420, which is our site operator licensing regulations, potentially for a revision. Not going to happen right away, might still be a few years down the road, but I think when we get to that point, we will need to collectively look at what makes sense, even how we regulate spaceports in the future. Not a topic for today, but as your spaceports that are existing or even in planning, start to think about those things, because that is something the FAA does want to undertake in the coming years.
All right. Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I wanted to get in at least one more question from James Causey, and we're putting the Global Spaceport Alliance here in this one. Global interoperability comes up as an opportunity for all spaceports. What are your thoughts on the best approaches to start the process? Maybe, John, we can start with you, because you are a UK spaceport that's hosting a US-based launch vehicle.
Yeah, so we're yeah, absolutely. So we're trying, we face that challenge every day, bringing a US launch vehicle across to the UK to then operate out of the UK. And so from a technical perspective, I think we've overcome a lot of the challenges there, and that's just about making sure the infrastructure is in place to be able to support the system. As I was mentioning earlier, I think the biggest challenge at the moment is just bridging the understanding of the different stakeholders, and especially on the regulatory side, for example. The way that the UK assesses risk is very different from the way that the US does, for example. So I think on the technical side, it can be easily accomplished. The harder part is just bridging across to the environment in which you're operating. So, and it's a little bit easier with ourselves being an air-launched or a horizontal spaceport, where we're dealing with air-launched systems, because especially in terms of our first operator is effectively a 747 operation.
All right. Pam, sorry you're nodding and such there. What are you seeing in terms of global interoperability, and what is the FAA doing to help support that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And I agree with what John just said. In addition to John's comments, I'll say government to government as a regulator, we have an opportunity. So the best way to have global interoperability, or at least to start, is for our governments to agree on a consistent set of requirements for safety. And I know we worked really closely, John, you're probably aware of, with the UK Civil Aviation Authority as they went and published their regulations last year. I think it was end of July last year. They're not identical to FAA regulations, but they're very consistent. And I think that's a win. That's a good start. We do have a little bit of a differences, like you said, John, in the way we, we have a number for risk. They use as low as reasonably possible, but not something we can't overcome. Because after we have a consistent set of requirements, then we can move to the next step, was how can we partner government to reduce duplication? And I think I talked about this a little bit maybe at a Spacecom meeting when we had one in January, but we don't duplicate between governments aircraft certification. Long-standing agreements in place for that. I think that's where the space industry needs to grow next. Legislation, at least in the US, is not super ready for that yet. I think we could be creative and maybe get to something close, but it's not really clear. So maybe some legislation needs to change to see that end state. But what can we do now just to reduce duplication? And that's what we're working on with the UK government, as John probably is aware of, among other countries. So that, from a regulator perspective, Jeff, I think is the first step to that global interoperabilities. One final point I'll make, well, what can the spaceports do? Talk to each other, just like through this kind of a forum or even one-on-one, you know, Steve talking to John, because as regulators, we can try to have a consistent set of requirements for safety, but there's a great opportunity, spaceport to spaceport, to talk about operations and how do you have consistent operations on the site, which might be a level of detail below the regulators typically get into. We got a great opportunity for spaceports.
Right. Thanks everyone for sticking in. We're running a little bit into extra time here, but I wanted to squeeze in one more question from Andrew Nelson. He had a fairly long comment there, but I will sort of summarize it for Pam in that, would there be, you know, specific other concerns that would come with recognition of space as a mode of transportation when it comes to infrastructure budgets?
Yeah, so, and thanks, Andrew, again, you know, kind of like Pat had asked before, what are the barriers, what are the negatives? I don't claim to be an expert. I still need to go through an education process. I think my first is, as I already kind of mentioned, is, you know, is there additional oversight that might come from different parts of the government that may not welcome at this point for our space industry? So I don't know that I have anything other than I know a little bit about the security piece, because we're walking through that now in our security reviews and how it pertains to critical infrastructure. I personally need to look at it smarter. If Andrew, you or Pat or anybody learn about other things that we should be aware of, please pass them on to me. I would love to learn as we kind of collectively learn what the implications might be, both good and maybe not so good.
All right. Just very briefly, I wanted to ask if Steve, John, or Pam, any sort of final thoughts or words of wisdom they wanted to share with the audience before I hand things back over to James to close things out.
No, I think just echoing on what Pam was saying, actually, it's for me, it's not about sort of competition, it's about how we can work together and how we can, you know, between the spaceports and develop that sort of common way of working and understanding. You know, there's no point reinventing the wheel, and learning off each other is the way to build and improve the situation. So all very supportive of that.
All right.
And I concur with John. And together, everybody achieves more. So I think there's a great opportunity, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of this organization. And I'm looking forward to continuing conversations and dialogue, and look forward for synergy opportunities, and encourage anybody to reach out. We are open for business to talk and discuss, and looking forward to having future conversations.
Yeah, and I'll third that notion. Keep talking. My biggest recommendation among spaceports is continue to talk. It's not adversarial. Partnership will win the day. The companies that you're talking to that might be talking to multiple of you, it's not adversarial. It's not competition. From what I'm hearing is a lot of the smaller companies want multiple launch sites. So in the end, everybody wins. if we can have those conversations, promote interoperability, it really strengthens not only our spaceport base, but also the industry.
I think one of the key messages there is working together, spaceports can overcome a lot of the shared challenges that they face. So thank you everyone for participating. We had a great discussion. James, I'll hand it back over to you to close things out.
Okay, Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you, Pam, Steve, George, John. Just a fantastic, fantastic discussion. We have run over, so I'm not going to hold you up any longer. We look forward to our next webinar and talk to you all soon. Take care and bye for now.